The Tyler Nixon Show. My guest today, from Houston, Texas, running for Congress in the 18th Congressional District as an independent, Aaron Hermes. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'm running as a Republican.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I
Yeah,
stand corrected. Excellent. Okay. I don't know why I
I'm
thought you were.
independently minded. So
That's right.
there's
Okay.
that.
Well, excellent. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. Now,
Yeah,
is that Ron Paul's old district?
it's not, but it's
Okay.
neighboring it.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's mhm.
He was in gosh, what was his I'm trying to think of the name of the town where he's from. Not is it Galveston, I think was part of that.
Well, no, he's down there in Jackson,
That's right. That's right.
Jackson.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So,
but he also was in 22 in Fort Bend County.
and obviously I
Right,
think
right.
the districts have changed. They change every 10 years with the redistricting, but you and I met each other interestingly through music. So what I and just kind of realized we were politically aligned and had the same values at least. So why don't you give us a quick introduction of yourself, your background, and why you're running for Congress?
Okay, yeah, definitely. I am definitely not a politician or a lawyer or political science major. I'm an artist, an audio engineer, free thinker, that I don't see another choice but to be politically involved right now because I definitely don't have a career doing those other things in the fascist hellscape that's trying to be implemented right now. So I really, this is to me, this is the way that I can best utilize my skills and my live in my fullest potential because that kind of wasn't happening. It didn't feel like. I mean, I still do music and audio and all that, but it's just
Now, do you
it's
play the
hard.
sitar?
I do. I play the Indian sitar. I play classical Indian music, and a lot of other styles as well. But it's a super rare thing, and
Yes. Yeah.
you have to have your stuff figured out and healed inside to be able to even approach making that kind of music. So I definitely come at life from a different perspective, you could say, than a lot of people. Um, and I'm actually running on a human rights platform. Uh, and I think that Republican Party is the party most aligned with human rights. It's definitely not perfect, but I'm running to be the change I want to see. I want to make it better. And where the Democrat Party, they're not aligned with human rights, and it's impossible to be aligned with human rights and be a Democrat from my perspective.
Now, why don't you? I mean, because different people would use different terminology or would use that term loosely. I think the Democrats would tell you they're the human rights champions, or maybe they once were civil rights anyway. Although I think that the history of the Democrat Party is one of obviously subjugation and racism and corruption, going back to almost its founding. But what would you consider to be human rights? I mean, obviously our Constitution enshrines rights, but why don't you give us a little quick breakdown of what you would consider human rights? What are the key rights that would qualify for that?
My pleasure. Actually, human rights, when you do a deep study of what human rights actually are, there's too many to list. In fact, in our founding documents, it said among those, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And our founders understood that our rights come from our creator, whatever you want to call it. And basically, our human rights are involve doing anything that doesn't harm anybody else. So I don't have a right to kill you, hurt you, but I have a right to, you know, take a walk.
Right,
I'm
right.
not hurting
So,
anybody.
so liberty. I mean, it's fair to say that at
Yeah,
the core of it is human liberty, obviously, and and
absolutely.
and to be free from the oppression of other people and from having your liberty imposed upon. And would you consider property the ability to the right to possess property, to have your own, to if you've earned it or however you've acquired it in a non-harmful and a lawful way, would you consider that to be a human right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I'm a student of Ron Paul, and so he inspired me early on. I supported his bid for president, and when he first ran in the early 2000s, and that's what got me into kind of the Republican Party, where I was more of an independent before that. Um, And human rights, the left talks about human rights, but they call things rights that aren't rights. They call abortion, which is in essence killing a human fetus, a right. They call it a reproductive right. They just made that
Hmm.
up. It's not an actual right. You
Well,
don't
it's
have
not
a right.
reproductive either.
It's not. It's actually the opposite, right? And that's
It
the thing. That's
is.
the
It's
satanic element of the world we're living in.
it
Everything's
really.
been inverted. And I do differ from some Republicans. I believe that if a mother's life is in danger, just as if your life is in danger, you have the right of self-defense. And I believe that if a mother's life is in danger, she can preserve her life before her babies, if there's a legitimate, scientific, medically backed reason, you know. But I'm consistent. I look at all issues from vantage of human rights. Another thing that the left gets wrong all the time, they call healthcare a human right. Well, healthcare is goods and services of other people. That's not a right. You're not born into this world and people just owe you things. They owe you their services, and it's not a right. It's like healthcare is something we need to get right. We need to get it correct. We need to have a compassionate system, and obviously there's some profits that aren't going to where they should be going, and in fact, like mainly insurance companies and whatnot, and the people can't afford basic health care, can't afford insurance because of outrageous prices and price gouging. So we do need to figure it out, but it's not a right, you know. So what I'm trying to do running on human rights is educate everybody what human rights are, then bring everybody together around human rights. Like, let's forget left and right. Let's look at right and wrong, you know.
Well said. Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that because I mentioned defining human rights because again, the left would consider right to health care a human right. And you're absolutely right in the sense that what they're really good at it that I found is taking a very broad brush, poorly defined or extremely generalized or broad term like healthcare. I mean, what healthcare could mean anything from putting a Band-Aid on your cut finger in your kitchen to having heart surgery, open heart surgery, and yet they say health right. You have a right to healthcare, but what they don't say is that essentially making healthcare right means you're enslaving an entire category of people who choose to give services or choose to become experts because you're coercing them to provide this to other people. And it gets back to which, I mentioned property rights, obviously. They cannot recognize liberty because they have to violate it in so many ways to accomplish these so-called rights, which is really just getting on Uncle Sugar's dole and having people dependent on the Leviathan government that they control, and they get to dictate and to essentially hand out. I mean, essentially, if you put healthcare in the charge of the government, my God, I mean, look at what they're doing in terms of censorship. Do you think conservatives would be targeted for lesser or substandard healthcare if the Democrat fascist dictatorship, unilateral dictatorship were in place? I
Right.
think it would bleed into everything. But well, Aaron, we got a quick news bulletin coming in, and we're gonna catch that, and we'll be back in a minute. You're watching the Tyler Nixon Show. Don't go away.
Hear about it.
We're depending.
And I'm sure you know.
And today on the Tyler Nixon Shows with Aaron Hermes, a Republican candidate for Texas Congressional District, Texas 18. And Aaron, what does the landscape look like for that race? Are there multiple? Is there an incumbent currently? Give us the breakdown.
Oh, there's an incumbent. I'm sure you know her well, Sheila Jackson Lee.
Oh,
One of
yes,
the most
we've all heard of.
beloved members of Congress on both
She
sides.
she and Maxine Waters could geez, talk about
Yeah.
a static duo.
Yeah. So I live in the district. I've lived here my entire adult life. 4 years ago, when Pete Olson stepped down in 22, I actually ran there, and Ron Paul used to represent that district as well. I have some history with that district, grew up there, ran there in an open seat with 15 primary challengers. It was the largest
Wow.
primary challenge race in the country at the time. Now I'm running. Back then, 4 years ago, I didn't think anyone really stood a chance against Sheila. But now the math, everything has changed.
Hmm.
Politically, there's a giant realignment happening. At the same time, she ran for mayor last year, lost very badly. And that was the first
Wow.
time she's ever lost. And on the very last day, she filed to take her old seat back. Um, and
So
basically,
it was an off year race.
an off year.
The mayoral race you said she ran for, so she ran for that not in a congressional year. In other words, it
Right,
was
right. Yeah,
an
yeah,
odd year. So she was
it was.
able to go back and run back to Congress, huh? Oh,
Literally, she
jeez.
lost the runoff on Saturday, and on Monday was the cutoff date to file for her old seat.
Yeah,
They must do it like that on purpose, right?
probably.
But she has a challenger with $1 million that's raised $1 million now. So she, for the basically first time in a long time, she has a primary fight that she has to win, to make it on. But her challenger, it's the same. It's basically the new face of the same thing. I mean, she even says she doesn't have any policy differences. She used to work for Sheila. Her name's Amanda, by the way, Sheila's main primary challenger. And she graduated from Harvard with a law degree, just like Sheila. She has a political science major. She worked for Sheila. She doesn't have any policy differences. And she's just a new face and just wants the job and the attention. She doesn't have any solution. She doesn't have any
Yeah.
unifying principles, nothing.
The
So that's
Democrats are
that.
great at cloning their leaders in the sense and just producing the same reprobates basically. I mean, look at Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, she went in there as this bright new face, and she might as well be Nancy Pelosi's the spawn of Pelosi. I mean, she's the same kind of completely arrogant, megalomaniacal ethic, if you can call it an ethic or whatever it is, operating premise. And it's just these Democrats. You don't get any change. In fact, the younger ones are worse in many cases because there's no institutional memory there. At least Sheila Jackson Lee is old enough to remember what Congress was like before it was taken over by the radical left and turned into a complete joke.
And she's so unpopular. I mean, her challenger raised $1 million in the first quarter or the first month of this year, raised 200,000 next to Sheila's like 20,000.
Oh yeah, I'm
Um,
sure.
and now on the Republican side, in my race, I have one primary challenger. And this is a big reason I got in the race. There was only one person that had signed up. I had my eye on it for a while, and I just thought that it was a really weak candidate that signed up. Now, her
Now,
name's
real quick, is that because it's a very heavily Democrat district, meaning you got your odds, your work cut
yeah.
out for you. Let's just say, okay, just want to be sure because
Sheila wins
obviously,
the general 70-30 every time. So a lot
okay,
of Republicans don't try. A lot of people don't want to donate money. They might think it's a waste or something like that.
right.
But I'm coming at this from a totally different angle. Now, just getting back to my primary challenger really quick, she's a federal agent who quit her Fed job to do this, but she can go back to her job anytime. She doesn't even live in the district. She lives like in Humble, not even in near Houston. I mean, it's north of Houston. It's near the edge of the district. The district goes up there, but she doesn't live in the district or anywhere near the heart of the district. She's not even from Texas. I don't think she's from the U.S. and really has no business running. She has no solutions, nothing. And she's very
Just her,
opaque.
just her. What can you give us? I mean, if you want to share her name, I mean, we might as well, so
Yeah,
people can inform themselves.
her name is Lana Centones or Centonze. I don't really know how to say it.
Okay,
And
and she's a
so
federal agent,
yeah, with the
which
and I met her at the Houston Chronicle interview where they're going to endorse one of us.
yeah.
And she didn't even want to give them her birth date. She didn't want to say what agency she worked for. She wants to keep
What?
everything a secret. She's running for public office,
How do
you
you?
know.
Yeah, that's so bizarre, and it really reflects. If you'll notice this, the deep state always seems to churn out people to run for office. We've had quite a few intelligence and former FBI or former whatever.
Hmm.
They're going to run for Congress now, and this is interesting. Is they're running in a race where, it's a heavily Democrat district. It's likely to go to either Sheila. Well, hopefully you can make headway, but I mean, we're realistic. you've got your work cut out for you. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. But that being said,
Definitely.
it's like if they probably perceive that there wouldn't be any type of challenger. And they don't want to
Hmm.
have this, they don't want to have this idea that, oh my God, these Democrats aren't even facing challengers. There's no actual election, so they'll probably identify someone who has some interest in who works for the federal government, who's aligned with the deep state, with whatever those values, and they'll put them up as a quote Republican.
Hmm.
And this is how the
That's definitely
Republican Party's
possible.
been infiltrated by rhinos and taken over by these people who do not hold Republican values. They're Democrats, Democrat light at best, if
Now, I
not too
don't know if she really
completely.
has the everything going on to be even an asset to them. I don't know if she just did it for selfish reasons or if she was some sort of asset, you know.
Well, you don't just get to walk away from a federal job just to disappear and run for governor or run for office on a lark. I mean, clearly she has some sort of backing if you're saying she can go back to her job. And
Yeah, yeah.
you know, so I'm not saying every candidate who runs like that, but they certainly make it easy for people who are federal bureaucrats and federal executive branch agents of some variety to jump into races. And I mean, I think in I forget what the year it was, maybe in 2016, there was like more CIA, former CIA, or even current CIA people running for Congress or federal positions than in history. I mean, it was in the dozens. And
Yeah.
this isn't an accident. I mean,
No.
this is them. They're trying to insinuate themselves anywhere they can. So
Absolutely.
I want to. So have you been sort of out campaigning? I mean, what are the main issues, or what are the for Houston, obviously, but also the larger district? What are the
Mhm.
concerns? I mean, obviously, I would think crime, inner city blight. Is that you tell me?
Yeah, crime, prison reform, infrastructure. Now, I'm running on human rights and election integrity because 4 years ago I came up with an election integrity plan that completely solves our election integrity issues, ballot security issues. It's a multi-tiered plan with multi-redundancies built in.
Let me interrupt you there. I'm sorry, Aaron. We're gonna take a short commercial break here, and then that'll give us time on the other side for you to lay this out because I'm very curious to hear about this. It's a big issue. You're watching the Tyler Nixon Show on today's News Talk. Don't go away.
Give me a minute with TNT Radio's Steve Mull.
Americans get into that question.
They're only 34, or not at all. Jean-Pierre.
World's in danger. See how you talk. TNT.
Lighting the fuse of freedom here at today's News Talk. You're watching the Tyler Nixon Show. My guest, Aaron Hermes, who's running for Congress in the 18th Congressional District in Texas. So, Aaron, before we get into your election integrity plan, I just want to ask you, one of your catchphrases or your motto, I guess, of the campaign is "Make Congress Great." Can you just give us a quick, 30-second breakdown of what you mean?
Well, I don't say make Congress great again because I don't really know when it was
Yes,
great, besides the founders.
exactly.
But yeah, you can go to makecongressgreat.com and you'll go to my website too. My official phrase is ready to rock the House of Representatives, you know.
That's right,
So,
of course. So what are your I noticed you have some a couple key positions, term limits, anything else of note?
yeah, reasonable term limits, probably 12 to 16 years, or 18 years, per office is what I'd find acceptable. These people like Sheila Jackson Lee, they've been there for 28 years. It's just too long. They need to move on. They need to let some new energy in the House.
Would you support term limits, or let's just say service limits on federal bureaucrats, and probably most importantly, right now federal judges have lifetime appointments. Would you support would require a constitutional amendment, but in addition to congressional term limits, to limiting the tenure of these judges that sometimes get on the bench at in their 40s and end up being there for 30, 40 years or longer?
Yeah, I would definitely be willing to look at that, and have that debate. Absolutely.
Okay. So election integrity. I understand there's been a good bit of there was a couple, was it, I don't know if it's Houston, but I know there was some pretty big scandals involving election fraud and things like ballot
That was right.
harvesting.
That was
Was
right
that
here in
Houston?
Harris County. Yeah, well, I mean,
Okay.
we had our own problems here in Houston. Actually, the election in 2022, I think it was.
I believe
They
so. Yeah.
ran out of ballot paper in key Republican areas, and the judge, who a lot of people think is corrupt, Lena Hidalgo, she won by like 10 or 15,000 votes.
Hmm.
And it was just a very razor thin margin.
Weren't there people who were working for her that were actually arrested and prosecuted?
Indicted, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know where their cases are at, but she's had her top people arrested and indicted.
So what do you see as the main sort of weak points in our system or in your system there? I mean, obviously it's different with each state. What are the weak points? What there, and then on a larger scale, and what are your solutions?
If we're talking about ballot
Election
security,
integrity. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Well, let me tell you my plan. Well, I'll say this: I was election judge last November. I really wanted to see how the sausage is made, and it's actually better in Harris County than it is in a lot of other places. We have serialized ballots, we have voter ID, we have paper ballots. We have a better system, but it's not. There's a lot of holes in it. But everybody in Harris County, go vote. Your voice matters. We all have to go participate. However perfect the system is. But I created a election integrity plan that completely solves all the problems associated. I talked to the top experts in the country. First of all, hand-marked paper ballots are the most secure form of voting, not just paper ballots. When your level of forensics, so you could have paper ballots and have a printer print out everything you want.
Right. No, we saw that. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, paper doesn't
So we
make
need
a difference.
hand-marked.
In fact,
and Trump and other people are not. I was running on this in 2019 before the 2020 elections. Right now, election integrity is a big issue, but no one is talking about my plan yet. I really would. I don't even care if I get credit. I just want to see these things happen. So we need. Basically, I'm looking at this. We can do this on a local level, but we can do this from a national level, from Congress, by creating a national set of standards that states have to adhere to, and those standards would involve hand-marked paper ballots, blockchain-enabled open source software. So blockchain, like Bitcoin, you can't create Bitcoin out of thin air. We don't want people creating votes out of thin air. So if we have a blockchain system, you wouldn't be able to do that as long as it's open source and everybody knows what's happening under the hood, right? That's an important factor. We need serialized ballots. We need voter ID on a national level. And something else that I came up with was, well, how do you know that it's blockchain enabled tabulation software, but how do you know your vote was really counted correctly? You put the paper in, that's it. Well, not only is there a scan of the paper ballot, but my idea is that you get to take home a piece of paper with no identifying markers, but just we'd have to figure out the way to protect voter anonymity. But you get a piece of paper. When you get home, you can go to the website that's been set up in your county and check the blockchain with those numbers that you'll be able to view your ballot without any identifying markers. But you'll be able to pull up the ballot and see in the blockchain, yes, my votes were still tallied correctly.
right.
Or
just like holding a cryptocurrency, essentially, same kind of deal.
And it's adding personal responsibility to the mix. Everybody can get involved. And then if your vote isn't in there correctly, then there's a hotline that would be set up, and you could call and you could look at the scan, and they could pull up. There could be a way to audit that.
Now you mentioned putting the paper ballot in the machine, but aren't we really just the problem is, I think that there are fraud points even just at the tabulator level, as we saw in Arizona and other jurisdictions where they feed it into a tabulator, but the internal firmware or whatever whatever software or whatever programming dictates it, they can flip it. So every Trump vote would count as a Biden vote and vice versa. So, I mean, at what point do we cut off the machines? I mean, I think, it's we say paper ballots.
That's why I did that element
might be hand counted too. I mean, that's just my 2 cents.
It could, and you wouldn't believe the pushback even from Republicans. I'm a precinct chair in the Harris County GOP, And I brought this up at the last meeting. Someone else wanted to add a proposal we should support paper ballots, and I wanted to modify that it should be hand-marked paper ballots in open source blockchain-enabled tabulation software. And it was just crickets. And there's so much pushback to just the paper ballot thing too. It's like, oh, it takes forever to count. It's impossible. But other countries somehow figured it out, like France and some places.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that that's a result of the fact that, okay, so, I mean, there's only really three possibilities here. They're lazy. They don't want to have to go through this, what it would take to count by hand paper ballots, and do manual counts. They're corrupt because they don't want to get rid of the machines. And option three, I don't know what. I mean, I can't really think of an option other than just a slavishness to technologies for the sake of it.
Naivety to how the system's really working, how bad things really are. If it wasn't obvious enough in 2020, and just people not really being aware of how different states and counties are operating, being stuck in a little bubble like around here, thinking that the rest of the world operates like that. In California, it's illegal to have a serialized ballot according to their state law, state constitution, I believe.
Wow.
So, yeah. And so this is a really big problem. And that's why we see, so much corruption in California, for instance, and how they're able to maintain control among all, when everything's out in the open, how bad it is.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting point you raised, because I'm a member of the State Bar of California, and my father moved there in 1990. So, I mean, I spent a lot of time in California, and it's always baffled me because the state used to kind of go back and forth between Republican and Democrat. You had, you obviously had your Democrats like your Feinsteins, but then you also had Pete Wilson, you had Ronald Reagan, you had, Richard Nixon obviously came from California. And so you had sort of there were definitely pockets, and still are to an extent. But statewide, you were able to elect, I guess Schwarzenegger would have been the last Republican. After that, though, it seemed like we hit a point where it didn't matter how much corruption came out, how badly the Democrats were and are, frankly, even worse now than ever, screwing that state up. I mean, turning paradise into a living hell, driving people out by the droves, denuding their tax base, basically. And yet, they just keep reelecting these people. And I mean, it's the point where I question that whether either that you have a completely ignorant voter base of just brain dead drones who just vote Democrat no matter what, which is a distinct possibility, or frankly, there's just epic fraud on a level that's that's Silicon Valley out there. I mean, who knows what's been going on? I mean, it seems like the Democrats don't even try out there, and they get elected and reelected over and over.
Well, they control it too, and so the real information is hard to get it to people's doorstep, because there's just so many blocks up. But
I mean, the taxation is so high there. I mean, and frankly, the economic conditions have become such that I questioned. I mean, no matter where you go, when people face those conditions, there usually is an outrage and then a backlash. And that's been the tradition of American politics for almost 200 years. And now it's like, forget it. I mean, they just keep getting reelected no matter how badly. I mean, they're screwing up worse. They're more corrupt than they've ever been in Congress. And yet you can't dislodge these people. I'm just sort of speaking, thinking out loud here. But I mean, obviously election integrity is huge. Are there any other proposals you might have to clean up Congress, to clean up the federal government, to radically change things? For the better?
Real quick, there's one thing I want to do that would help the people. You brought up taxes, high taxes in California. I want to completely eliminate the income tax if you're making $0 to $100,000. I don't think you should pay anything in income tax. Now, based on my research, that's 50% of the tax base. But those people paying that all the way up to $100,000 in that range, it only accounts for 3% of all the tax revenue that we get. But it's 50% of the tax-paying base for 3% of the revenue.
Right.
And it's a giant burden, especially with inflation, property taxes, all the other taxes we have. To pay,
and of that 50%, probably only about maybe 10% even pay that 3% really in the main. Because
I'm talking about taxpayers. I'm not talking about just 50% of yeah.
No, I'm talking about, I mean, well, okay, taxpayers, but I mean, let's face it, if people act like, oh, the poor, I mean, if you're making below probably, 30 in the 30s, by the time you get through with your deductions and your standard, your exemptions, whatever, I mean, people aren't really paying taxes below that level. I mean, it's almost the poverty level, which I don't think they should.
Right. But you have to
ahead.
you have to use deductions and whatnot. So if you go to apply for a home loan, your income wasn't 30,000, it was whatever it was after all the deductions.
That's right.
So it's hard to get ahead. I know this from personal experience.
Oh, I'm with you, brother. Believe me. I mean,
and so I don't think we should pay anything. And what's cool is that I think that like other tax, whenever we cut taxes, there's always a raise in the revenue. Like after
they
Trump's
make up
tax
for it.
cuts. Well, yeah.
Of course,
it inspires the economy. It spurs the economy as well.
Yeah.
So I think
Art Laffer, you're familiar with the Laffer curve, right? That's sort of a So there's a Laffer curve. Art Laffer came out with this. It's an analysis that there is a point past which where taxes are so high. If you go higher than that, then actually revenues begin decreasing because of either whether evasion or it just, like you said, it stifles economic growth to where you're squeezed. You're choking the golden goose.
Imagine
that's
the
a
fees
real thing.
Processing 50% of the tax base by the IRS. I think that would probably just eliminate that 3% right there. I mean, we could live without it. We could cut the budget 3%. It'd probably cancel it out with the fees that the IRS has to process all that.
Well, look at the lost labor of people. Look at the contortions people go through to try to avoid taxes, all the weird situations that are created. Oh, I have to buy this vehicle and I have to maintain it a certain, I mean, all these like bizarre decisions that are not rational necessarily for the person or logical or not applicable to their actual business bottom line or whatever their earning bottom line is. But they do it to make sure that, oh God, we've got to comply with this or jump through this hoop for the IRS so I can get this deduction. It is a perverse system.
And basically I would step it up so that people aren't always wanting to say, oh, I made 99,000. I didn't make 100. So I would say that everyone still files. But after 100, it would, like, let's say you make 102, you might pay 1% tax. 104, you might pay 2%, right? Or 4%. And you get up to the first bracket, which would be the 10% at like 110 or 115, whatever it is, right? And that way you're encouraged to go ahead and pay in when you start becoming more successful, but it's very small, and then now, it'd be great to eliminate the income tax for everybody. I would just like to start here. I think it's the most common sense thing we can do. We could do this tomorrow. How are you going to be against that? How are you going to be against?
I was going to say.
I want to hear the arguments against it.
No, hey, listen, brother. I mean, you mentioned reducing it for certain payers. I've really come full circle to the. We need, if anything, a national VAT tax or sales tax, a consumption tax, whereby everybody pays. If you're an illegal immigrant, if you're a criminal, if you're a gangster, if you're whoever you are, a foreigner, you're paying that tax if you consume. And guess what? We eliminate the need to expose our entire lives, every morsel of our existence to the federal government so they can just dissect us.
I have a problem with that. Now, that is going around in Republican circles. It's called a flat tax by some people.
No. I'm sorry. I have to correct you. A flat tax would just be a flat rate. That was what Dick Armey from Texas proposed. This is a totally different.
I know. Well, I've heard it's on purchasing, and I've heard that described in both ways: a flat tax on your income and a flat tax, and they kind of changed that. By some people are calling it, on goods. But the reason I'm against that is, do we want the government? Like, we already have a state income tax, and do we want all of our businesses having to report every transaction to the feds and then make sure that the feds get their.
Oh, I got you. Listen, we'll have to continue this conversation in another show, and I'd love to have you back to hear. I know it goes quickly to hear how your race is going, Aaron Hermes. Where can people find you, Aaron?
VoteHermes.com. MakeCongressGreat.com.
All right. Well,
follow me on Twitter, Real Aaron Hermes.
Well, we appreciate your coming on, Aaron. This is the Tyler Nixon Show for February 12th, 2024, here on Today's News Talk. Tomorrow we have Nate Kane running for Congress in West Virginia, and we'll see you then.